What's been there? Huh?
You can see me.
Doing a mic check to see if I can be heard.
Con, I can hear you.
Hallelujah.
You're in the dialogue here.
I'm live. So we have to do something right here.
I'm good. How are you?
Let me hear. Okay. At the time. All right, everybody. So shalom. All right, I'm not going to take up too much of your time this evening. What I want to discuss is the genetics, prophecies, and practices of the Israelites, of the Jews. Okay, so that's kind of what I want to go into. Can you make sure that's straight right there? The genetics, the prophecies, and the practices of the Jews. Now, what I really want to focus in on are the Levites. And the reason I want to focus in on the Levites is because the Levites had a very stern set of rules for lineage. The men were the priests. You had to be a Levite through your father's family. So there were no external influences or doctrines that could affect who was or who wasn't a Levite, for the most part. Okay, for the most part. With that being the case, when we see people saying that they are Levites or they are priests of Aaron's family, there's a very small possibility of outside genes, outside families having influence to change that particular genetic makeup. Okay. In other words, at some point, someone decided in Judaism, religious Judaism or so-called Judaism, that they were going to stop tracing who was a Jew, who was an Israelite from the father's lineage, and they decided that they were going to do it from the mother's lineage, the total opposite of what we see inside of the Bible, which put everything upside down on its head. It changed the whole definition of who was a Jew, who was an Israelite. And that's what kind of put us in a very precarious situation in terms of defining and recognizing somebody as a member of the tribes of Israel. Now, there are several common factors that we see, that we come across. Okay, one thing is that among several groups claiming to be of Israelite lineage, there's a subgroup that claim, of course, to be priests, and that's why I want to really zero in and focus on the priests. The priest was supposed to be from the family of Aaron. They were supposed to be from the family of Levi. They were supposed to be from the family of Jacob, the family of Isaac, the family of Abraham. Okay. Now, among these priestly groups that all of these Israelite groups claim to be Israelites, whether you're talking about Africa or Europe, North Africa, East Africa, South Africa, West Africa, Yemen, the Arabian Peninsula, or even in Iraq. All right, Iraq. You have so many of these groups that say that they come from Aaron's family. So they say that they are the priests, in essence, saying not only are we Israelites, but we are Levites, and we are also the priests of the family of the Levites. Now, coincidentally, if you want to call it that, out of all of these groups all around the world, they all carry the same DNA Y chromosome, which is called generally the CMH. Okay. Now, all of these people with this CMH genetic marker that have been separated from each other. I'm talking about people that are in Nigeria and people that are in Yemen that are supposed to have no genetic connection to a common ancestor with similar Hebrew-based practices. That's not supposed to be, unless there's validity and there's truth to the story that they present. The story that they are Israelites, they are Levites, they are Jews. So now, amongst most people, when you talk about Ethiopians, when you talk about Nigerians, IGBO specifically, when you talk about the Limba, whether from South Africa or whether from Zimbabwe, whether you talk about, different groups throughout Africa, it's easy for us as people of the West African Hebrew diaspora arriving in America. It's easy for us to identify and say, yeah, the Ethiopians, yeah, they can be Jews. The Igbos in Africa, yeah, I can see them being Jews. In Zimbabwe, in South Africa, Malawi, the Limba, oh yeah, they can be Jews. Now, all of these different groups I named that have people that say that they're Jews have a small population of people that say not only are they Israelites or Hebrews, but that they are also the priests, that they also belong to the tribe of Levi, belong to the family of Aaron, that they are the priestly family. And we can agree, right? Everybody can accept that, right? Can you accept? Oh yeah, these people from Africa, they look like me, right? They have to be Israelites because I'm an Israelite and they look like me, so it's very feasible, right? You can accept that, right? Is that hard to accept? But now, what if I come and say, well, guess what? When you go to to North Africa, when you go to Turkey, when you go to Greece, when you go to the Balkan areas in general, when you go to Syria, when you go to Iraq, you may start getting a little bit side-eyed, right? And say, well, I don't know about them, right? So would it make you feel better when I say, well, guess what? They have the same Y chromosome DNA that the Hebrews, that the Levites, the Aaronites, the priests in Africa have. So they all have the same father. Would that make you feel better? That make you feel better? And they got the same father, they got the same DNA. So that's kind of a buffer zone. Iraq, Syria, Yemen. We can kind of identify with them. A little bit of oppression, displaced people, right? The people that call themselves Israelites or Jews, they're kind of displaced. Not everybody's not there. Not on the same high level. But we see that that's a situation where we can kind of see them kind of fitting into that equation. And we don't have a problem with that necessarily, right? Nobody has a problem with that. But now, so where's the problem come in at? The problem comes in when I start talking about, oh, guess what? The people that live amongst the Ashkenazi in Poland and in Lithuania, first of all, they didn't start there, they migrated there. They didn't start there, they migrated there. When I say, well, some of them say that they are Levites also. Some of them say that they belong to the family of Aaron also. That'll be a little harder to accept that, definitely, right? It's definitely harder to accept. But when I come and say, well, these white people in Poland and these Arab people in Yemen and these Black African people in Zimbabwe that say that they are the ancient priests from the Second Temple period in Israel, they all have the same DNA Y chromosome, which means what? They got the same daddy. They got the same daddy. So, which means now you have to recalibrate who you say is or isn't a Levite, who is or isn't an Aaronite, a priest descendant, or who is or isn't a Jew, who is or isn't, because all of these different diaspora groups have people in their groups that say that, hey, we are descendants of Aaron, and they've been saying it for hundreds of years. And when you check all of their blood, they all have the same blood, which a lot of times is different than the people that they live around. All right, but I think that we need to understand also that the blood that they have now. This is kind of the catcher. There's a DNA group that became very popular called E1B1A. But when you go to Ethiopia, you find E1B1A and E1B1B. Okay? E1B1B. All right? E1B1B is not as popular, but it's still from Africa. All of these groups, the ones that say that they're Jews or Israelites from Lithuania, from Poland, from Nigeria, from, like I said, Ethiopia and Yemen, Iraq, they also have E1B1A, E1B1B genetics within their population group. Okay, you know what that means? That means that they also at some point have other paternal lineage contact that's the same. Now, don't let DNA be the end all be all in terms of who is an Israelite and who isn't an Israelite. All right. And that's where prophecy comes into place. All right. Most of the groups, they have experienced or they are experiencing the curses that we read about in Deuteronomy chapter 28. Most people didn't go through all of them. All right. The only people I know that went through so many of them were the ones that were in North America. A lot of them went through all of the curses, and, including having your animals taken away from you and sold to another people. Okay. So these socioeconomic, these historical, and these cultural markers, they must take precedence over any genetic marker, which means what? Which means even if you find these different people in South America, Central America, West Africa, that have different DNA types, but all of them fit the prophecies in Deuteronomy 28, that spiritual word of Yahweh must take precedence over what? Over the genetic expression of who their ancestry was. Why? Because we just don't know enough about DNA to say this is the definitive way to do everything. We don't know enough about the mutation. All we know is what they say and what they can demonstrate that they say is true enough to teach as a fact. But we don't know everything about DNA. But we have enough to show common factors between different people. If all of us have the same genetic ancestor, which is Adam, and then we all have a genetic ancestor after him, which is Noah, and then we all have a genetic ancestor where there was divergence between Ham, Shem, and Japheth, they all share a similar genetic structure. Now, geneticists would say this is impossible and this is possible and this could not happen. But the truth of the matter is that we simply don't know enough about DNA to say what Yahweh can and can't do in terms of DNA. Okay. So if you're put in a situation that is absent of genetic or absent of applied biblical practices, the prophecies take precedence. In other words, the people don't practice the things in the Bible and they don't have the DNA of the things in the Bible, but they fulfill everything about what the Israelites were supposed to go through, not just the genetic markers. Because the people that I mentioned, all right, that have the same genetic marker for the priests, they have vastly different historical experiences, right? The Limba have people that they say are the priests, but they also have people that have the E1B1A haplogroup, which they call the so-called Bantu, which is a made-up word. It comes from words ended with NTU, like Ntu, as a symbol of unity or oneness, but they didn't call themselves by that name. It's just a linguistics that they have in common. They maintain separate tribal and separate, genealogical distinctions amongst themselves. So Bantu is not a sound historical, biblical, or anthropological designation of people. It's a blood type that people have. And as I said earlier, we don't know enough about blood types to say who is or who isn't an Israelite simply based on the blood type, okay? But I will say this, that genetics and biblical prophecy and practices, they must be all understood and appreciated for the insight and the knowledge with which they bring to light, okay? So now, if we move into practices, each of these groups, whether we're talking about the E1B1B, J1 and J2 of Poland and Lithuania, or whether we're talking about the E1B1A, E1B1B genetic groups that carry J1 and J2 haplogroups from Ethiopia or from Lithuania or from Nigeria, they all have the same practices. And that brings me to my second point, which was genetics, prophecy, and practices. Passover, seventh-day Sabbath, biblical feast days, circumcision, Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy chapter 14, dietary practices, menstrual separation, having a Levitical and a priestly line within the community, Levitical and priestly community members. All of these groups have these in common, except for those that came into the Americans in captivity. But we have the prophetic aspect of it. We were totally stripped of our practices, but we still have the prophetic. And that's why you can't just say, well, you don't have the DNA, so you're not this, or you have the practices, so you are or are not this. All of these factors must be taken into consideration, with the biblical prophecies from the word of the Almighty being the final deciding factor in most cases of what you are definitively. And then with those practices and the genetic markers also being used to bring knowledge and insight into the determination of who's who. All right. Now, you can look at all of these things, the practices of the IGBO. All right. There's a book called, quite aptly, IGBO Jews, written by Gordon. It's called IGBO Jews, History and Tradition. There's another book written by Miller in 1995 called African Israelite Traditions. Okay, African Israelite Traditions. Okay. And we have all of these different genetic markers and practices. We have books written about that these people did have a lot of practices that were Israelite practices. Okay. So now when we look at Italy, when we look at Greece, when we look at The Caucasus, and this is where I kind of bring everything together. Okay, when we look at the Caucasus, and we look at Italy, and we look at Greece, and we look at Lebanon, all right? Well, we look at the Arabian Peninsula, take off Lebanon, we look at the Arabian Peninsula. 50 to 70% of the people in the Arabian Peninsula have a genetic marker called J1 and J2, okay? You find it also in high proportion in Italy and in Greece and in the Caucasus. Now, what does the Arabian Peninsula and the people of the Caucasus have in common? They have Abraham in common, because the Ishmaelites are supposed to come from Abraham, and the people in the Caucasus are supposed to come from Jacob, right? But yet and still, we see gene groups. We see a R gene group with the from the Caucasus Mountains, and we see a J group, J and R group with the people in Italy and the people from Greece. But generally speaking, J1 and J2 is most predominant. The highest population on the planet Earth that has that is the people of the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, so, but they also carry E1B1B in that same population. So you have J1, J2, and E1B1B within the Mediterranean and the Arabian Peninsula, which means that there's a convergence at some point historically. But we know biblically they all come from Abraham. And quite interesting, it is the Ethiopian Jews, aka the Beta Israel. They are the ones amongst their general population and amongst the population that say that they are the priests. You know what they do? They are the bridge for all of these genetic groups. Not only do they have J1 and J2, they also have E1B1A and they have E1B1B. Now, with all these genetic markers that we see amongst the Ashkenazi, the Sephardic, the Mizrahi, the IGBO, they have been able to seemingly live in relative harmony amongst each other in their identity as Jews. Specifically, not as Jews from the tribe of Judah, but more specifically as the tribe of Dan. Okay, so now when we talk about the Igbo have Sabbath, circumcision, they have dietary, they have Passover, they have tabernacles, they have priests from the family of Aaron and from the family of the Levites, which I just gave you the two books that talk about the oral traditions and as well as the social studies that have been done amongst them. And this is what? These are practices that are pre-European exposure. Meaning Europe, they didn't do these things after they came in contact with Europeans. They were doing them, and before Europeans came. And guess what else they have? 3 to 5% of all of the people that say that they are Igbo Jews, Igbo Israelites, 3% of them have, can you guess it? That's right, the CMH gene that says that we are the priests of the family of Aaron. They got the same gene, which means that at some point, either these Levites took a trip by themselves across Africa from Israel, or they traveled as a minority group, which they usually were, amongst a larger Israelite migration that came to be known as the Igbo. Now, it just so happens that the Igbo, their oral history is that they come from one of the sons of Gad, whose name is Eri, E-R-I. And they say that they came from the north. 33%, 1 out of every 3 persons that came into the colonies and into the United States of America in slavery is of Igbo descent, okay? And 40% of the people that came into the British Caribbean slave trade are of Igbo descent. And about maximum 30% is of Akan descent, which is like modern day Ghana. So the point is that, again, we see tribal differences based on Deuteronomy 28, based on Genesis 49, and based on Deuteronomy chapter 33. of the division of these IGBO people, we see tribal divisions between Benjamin and Levi because we're using the prophecy as the final factor in what nation are you and what tribe are you. So even though almost half of the people in the Caribbean, meaning almost 4 out of every 10, 40%, all right, 40%, 4 out of every 10, all right, or that would be almost like, 1 out of every 2, just out of 1 out of every 2, all right, we want to do it like that. And then when it comes to the people in America, the tribe of Judah, 1 out of every 3 of them. Okay, 1 out of every 3 is considered to be of Igbo descent, which means that they link back to the same families that were supposed to fulfill the prophecies of captivity and dispersion and destruction of family structure that the Levites and the other tribes experienced. So we have strong genetic information that links to the family of the Levites, the priests specifically, and we have a strong oral tradition linking them to a direct family of Gad, an oral tradition predating European invasion, European contact, if you will. And we also have cultural practice. So we have the 3 factors that we want. We have genetics, we have prophecy, and we have practices, both in North America as well as throughout the Caribbean, and I'm sure in different parts of South America also. So we can firmly say that these Igbo are the Israelites, and we see a firm connection with the Igbo and the African Americans, as well as the Afro-Caribbean people. Now, remember, when we go to Iraq, what do we have in Iraq? During the time of the Babylonian captivity, we had Ezra and we had Nehemiah. We had Daniel and we had Jeremiah, which were all alive at some point during the Babylonian captivity, with Daniel being in the Babylonian captivity during the onset of the captivity. Now, Ezra made a lot of the Hebrews stay behind, all right, due to their heavy linguistic, heavy cultural, and heavy marital assimilation. We can see this easily in Ezra chapter 3, verse 1, Nehemiah chapter 7, verse 6, and Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 4 through 7, where they were told to build houses, live in those houses, plant the food and eat the food. So we have a clear remnant of Hebrews that were in Babylon, that stayed in Babylon, aka Iraq, that didn't go into West Africa, that didn't go into East Africa. Are they any more or any less Hebrew than those that migrated into the heart of Africa beyond the Sahara, sub-Sahara, and went into the captivity and the slave trades on the eastern part of America, and subsequently deeper into America, the Caribbean, Central America, and South America? No. And guess what they have? They have the same haplogroup among them that say, hey, guess what? We're here. We're the priests. We are the priests. We're here. We are, the genetic ancestors, the genetic descendants of Aaron. So we have to recognize them as who they say, no matter how much they love to assimilate into the people in Europe that say that they are the Jews. At the time of the contact that most of these people had, the tribe of Judah in America was not telling anybody or looking for anybody or reaching out across the ocean to different communities. The people that were, of the Sephardic community and the Europe-based communities, they reached out to other people. And that's the same thing that the tribe of Judah from America has to do now. Because it's easy to sit back and say, well, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But are you going to structure and organize yourself enough to get everything straightened out? When we go into Yemen, I would call, out of all the groups of Israelite communities, I would say that Yemen would be the Torah scholars. They preserved one of the Babylonian pronunciations, which was spoken during the time of the Second Temple, one of the most ancient pronunciation that we have. They're very strict Torah observant. And on top of that, we have a Himyarite Israelite kingdom, which comprise all of what we call Yemen now. So why would we reject them from being Israelites like us? Why would we? And can you guess what else they have? At a 10 to 15% ratio? Can you just take a wild guess what else they have? Anybody? They have the CMH also, just like who has? Yemen, just like Nigeria, just like Ethiopia. So are we going to discount their oral traditions and accept everybody else's that looks black or brown like us, that have been maintaining a scholarly level of Torah, whose children come up to read the Torah in Hebrew at 5 years old? At 5 years old, Besh in Turkish, Sont in French, Cinco in Spanish, 5 in English. All right. So they all Chumash or Hamash in Hebrew, by the way. So they have to be recognized as Hebrews. They have to be. Why? Because they have everything, and they were persecuted, killed by the Arab general population and treated very inhumanely for an extended period of time by the Muslims. Nonetheless, they maintained their Hebrew traditions under oppression and under persecution. Why don't they deserve to be recognized as Israelites by us? Now, everybody's favorite group, one of the favorite groups that we all have, are going to be the Beta Israel, which is also known as the Falasha, which is a word that means foreigner, if I'm not mistaken. The Falasha claim to be from the tribe of Dan. They have genetic markers for North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, and for the Middle East. Like I said before, they have J1, J2, all right, E1B1B, which is North Africa, E1B1B, which is also East Africa, and E1B1A, which is West and Sub-Saharan Africa. They have genetic markers for all of those groups within their lineage of the people that say that we are Israelites. And their story goes back to being descendants of the tribe of Dan. Very interesting books written about that, one by a guy named Stephen Kaplan, called The Beta Israel in Ethiopia, from earliest times to 20th century, written in 1984. There's also a book by a guy, Wolf Leslau, Leslau, called Falasha Anthology, written way back in 1951. This is more of a social and oral history book because it goes into the laws, it goes into the prayers, and it goes into the liturgical text and practices, what they did during the holy days and during circumcisions. And they have the genetic markers. They kept the Sabbath. They did the circumcisions. They practiced a kosher Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14 diet. They practiced laws of separation, aka Nidar. And they also have a Cohen priest system. They have Kahan, and they also practice Passover. And can you guess what else they have? CMH. They have CMH also. So we can't just say, oh, Igbo Jews and Limba Jews, Limba and Igbo Hebrews, and then we got priests. I was given a first-hand account by a living, breathing, Torah-observant Igbo leader in Nigeria that told me among the Igbo, they have people that call themselves Igbo, right? But that also say that they are the priests and the Levites. Do you know what that means? That means that there was a tribal melting pot that came together where you had at least two tribes, Gad and Levi, coming together saying what? Oh, I'm Igbo. But they came from two different tribes of Israel. So the tribal identifications we see in West Africa are not always the ancestral tribal lineage of the people that are living under one tribal name. Okay, so 3 to 5% of those people say that they are Israelites. They are not Israelites, but they are priests from Aaron. And you know what it was in ancient Israel? It was about 3% of the whole population. So this is right on par with the ancient population proportion of the ancient Israelites. Now, among the beta Israel, which is also called Phalasha, again, they are like the genetic bridge because they bring all of the different Israelite groups together under one homogeneous population, saying we are Israelites, we are Jews, and it's a kingdom called Simien, Simien, which was also known to be a Hebrew kingdom within Ethiopia. So we, brothers and sisters, are a small, disconnected group of Israelites in comparison to the global population, which we must recognize and respect as being just as Hebrew, just as Israelite, just as Gadite, just as Danite, okay, just as Jew as we are, all right? Now, of course, the Limba have a very high concentration, which is between 8 and 10%, all right, of the Limba people say that they are from Aaron's family, which the unique position that they hold is that they say, okay, this is Levi and this is Aaron. And everybody that they tested and said that they were from Aaron, can you guess what they had? CMH. CMH. Now, the Limba, they have a cultural practice of the Sabbath and of circumcision and of certain holy days, but during colonialism, a lot of that was lost. Some of them were under the Portuguese, some of them were under the British, and some of them were under the Belgium, depending on what part of Africa you go into. So these are just a few pieces of information that we need to take into consideration when we're saying who is or who isn't a Jew. Sure, we have Deuteronomy chapter 28, but how broad is your exposure? How broad is your access? How broad is your interaction to all these other groups of Israelites around the world that say that they are Israelites? The ones that say, hey, we come from the 12 tribes also. We can pause at this time and see if we have any questions or any comments or anything that we want to expound upon. And all this information is easily and readily available. Okay. All right. So now here, any questions from our live audience? Does our live audience have any questions? In Chiapas? Come on, give me something. You the live audience, the remote audience ain't, got nothing to ask. What about the live audience? Any questions from the live audience here? Yes.
What you spelling? The last thing you spelled?
What was the last thing I spelled? CMH. CMH. That's the group that's a genetic marker in the bloodstream of all of the people that say that they are Israelites from the family of Aaron, from the Levite family. Okay, so we have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Then we have Jacob change his name to Israel. From Israel, we have Levi, and from Levi, we have Amram, and then we have Moses. We have Miriam, then Aaron, and then Moses is the baby brother. And then Yahweh chose Aaron to be the priest over all of the nation of Israel, to help with their sacrifices, to offer up sacrifices to Yahweh, to offer incense to him, okay, to perform the services to give forgiveness on the Day of Atonement. So everybody that says that, and Aaron had a certain kind of blood. So everybody that says that Aaron had a certain kind of blood and he lived over 3,000 years ago. But everybody that says that they come from the family of Aaron, everybody that says they come from the family of Aaron, they have the same type of blood. You understand? They have the same, and all of their blood looks the same. When you put it under a microscope and you test it and you see what makes up this blood, they say, oh, it's a special blood group called J1 and J2, which shows that they didn't do a lot of mixing and they kept their bloodline of the men, who they considered to be priests, they kept it more pure than anybody else. Also, the people, when you go into ancient Israel and they find like an old tooth from a little girl whose tooth came out or something, or they find a bone of somebody that was buried, they do testing, and when they test that tooth or they test that bone, the type of DNA that they find is J1 and J2. Now, they may also find other types. I'm not saying that they don't find E1B1A or E1B1B. I'm not saying that they don't find different types of blood. I'm not saying that they don't find R1. I'm not saying they don't find R2. But I am saying that I know that they find J1 haplogroup of DNA and J2. And among these groups in Israel, when they check the modern day Palestinian people, not just Gaza, there's a lot of Palestinians outside of Gaza. When they go into Hebron, when they go into Ramallah, when they go into Haifa, when they go into parts of the Negev desert, where the Bedouin people live at, they, one, have practices of the Israelites, not the Muslims. Even if they are Muslims, they still have a lot of practices of the Israelites, number one. Number two, they have a genetic connection to the same teeth and bones that they find that are 3,000, 2,000 years old. Number three, they all have verbal, oral history in their families saying that we are Jews. So you have two populations of people in Palestine. You have Israelites and you have Canaanites. You have the original people of the land, and then you have the let's call it the second wave of people, of the second wave of immigrants into the land that held on to it for a long time, which would be the Hebrews. So there's a lot of what we said would be Arabs, or who we would call Palestinians. There's a lot of them that say, hey, we are Hebrews. It's a secret family history that's guarded. But when you go, a lot of the people there say that. Not only that, but we have the Pashtun of Afghanistan, as well as the Pashtun of Pakistan, that say that they are Hebrews also. So this isn't like an isolated occurrence. Most of these groups have secret pockets that say, hey, we're Muslim, but I need Yehudi. We're Muslim, but we're still ethnic Jews. All right. As well as the fact of in all these different places, also Yemen, Palestine, Iraq, Iran, we have people that came there as Hebrews as part of the Arab slave trade, which went from East Africa into the Arabian Peninsula and beyond, and into the Persian Gulf area, where we now see Iraq, Kuwait, and Iran, and then going south into Pakistan, and then going further south into India, and ultimately ending at Sri Lanka. So we have population of Israelites that fulfill Deuteronomy chapter 28 from East Africa going into Western Asia in slavery, captivity, and bondage, and their family structure being destroyed and disconnected from their ancient family groups in East Africa also. So CMH stands for Cohen Modal Haplogroup. Cohen Modal Haplogroup. All right, Cohen, C-O-H-E-N, Modal, M-O-D-A-L, and then haplogroup, H-A-P-L-O-G-R-O-U-P. All right. So the Palestinians, a lot of Palestinians are genetically related to the people of the land from ancient times, and they are genetically hidden relationship to the 12 tribes of Israel and specifically to our group of Israelites that came from West Africa into the Americas. A lot of Palestinians are Israelites, are Hebrews. All right, so that's going to end this particular session on this topic for now. And when I speak, I'm speaking from traveling to a lot of these areas and talking to the people there, not just researching, on paper or researching in history books. And when we talk about Africa and we talk about the diaspora of the Hebrews in Africa, one of the oldest books that we can find written by a person of that diaspora would be by Rudolph R. Windsor, and the book is From Babylon to Timbuktu, because there was a trail from Ethiopia to Agadez, and from Agadez to Timbuktu, and from Timbuktu, which was like the empires of Mali, Niger. There was an strong Israelite presence in that part of Africa also. I'm talking about writings in Hebrew and cemeteries in Mali that came into Mali from North Africa and from East Africa, from different trade routes, and then migrated further south, into places like Nigeria, Togo, Benin, and in those areas over there. And there was various trade routes that they used to get into West Africa, not only one, but this is the general wave of movement from east to west of the 12 tribes of Israel, from Israel to Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, to East, South, and West Africa, and to North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean. And that's all I can really offer you for right now. If there's no question and comments, we'll go ahead and sign off. We're supposed to go from 6 o'clock to 6:30, but now I see it's 6:51. So we went 21 minutes over. My apologies for that. So thank you, and have a good night, good day, good afternoon. Shalom.